Hello, this is an assessment of a Bluthner style 4 baby grand piano. It's 150 centimetres long, 4 foot 11 inches, so it's a small piano, and Bluthners are very good at making small grand pianos. It's quite a relatively common piano, not as common as we'd like it to be because it's very popular, but very successful small grand piano and very much loved by many people. Just having a look at the piano to see what would improve it. Looking down the side here, the polish is pretty good really, so I think just making it good rather than repolishing it, though we could obviously repolish, but it takes 70 hours and therefore 30 coats of polish. It brings out more contrast in the grain, but this is pretty much, I think it's original, so you can see here actually it shows up more contrast on the video than it does live for some reason, and that's the kind of contrast that you get when you do repolish one of these. So that's interesting because looking at it live, it doesn't look as contrasting as it does on the video, which is so anyway, it's in good condition. There's a scratch there. Obviously, you can make that good. And looking around the other side, we can make good these scratches here. And there's bits I think that could be done. Reasonable amount of tidying up. Let's look at the top lid. There's no fade line, I don't think, on it. No, not at all. So you often get a fade line where the lid's been held back, as you'll have seen before. So that's good, and integral, which is unusual actually, so that's good news. Now you can see here obviously that needs making good where fingernails have been scratching, and this can be polished up a little bit. I think that can be polished without damaging the wood behind. Obviously our polisher will know whether that can be done. We do that regularly. I would have thought that can be shined up. And down the bottom here, the pedals are very low, they're 5.5 centimetres from the floor, which is good. You can see a slight mark on the pedal that's been used more often. That's quite good really, 5.5. Normally you've got, new pianos are usually 7 or so you've got room for putting caster cups underneath, and they're already small caster cups, so that would be even lower without them. So that's something which is encouraging. But the legroom isn't that great, so if you're very tall, that's 59.5, which is a bit less than 61 would be an average sort of piano, I would say, and some legrooms up to 65, which is very good for tall people. I'm mentioning that because there are quite a few folks who are tall these days, and it seems to be a lot of pianists are, so that's important to know. The ivory keys are in very good condition, except for one, which I think probably come off and been put on with some glue that's made it different colour. So we could obviously improve that one, and this one here has been stuck down and put back, to come off and put back on, and there's a little ridge there. We could take that off and get rid of the ridge, but apart from that they're all in perfect condition. Looking at the inside of the piano, it's a bit dusty, as you can see. Obviously that's not a problem. The tuning pins, those screws by the way have come off here. I'll be showing you why we've taken those off in a minute, but looking at the tuning pins, it's quite important to see if your tuning pins look as though some of them have been knocked in a bit, and there are one or two loose ones. They can be reset. I've tried resetting one of the loose ones, so that's an option rather than having to change them. Looking generally along here, the tuning pins, I think some of them have been no, I don't think they have been knocked in really at all, so we can certainly do that if they're a bit on the loose side. They're resetting them, we call it. I'll show you that in a second. And looking at the bass strings here, they are original Bluthner bass strings. You can tell the type of coning that Bluthner use here is unique to them, and these bottom ones here, I think they're original too. So the sound of them in the bass, and we'll start with that, is a bit dull really. So I think you can turn bass strings, and it gives them a bit more brightness. If you're listening to this and can't buy new strings, you can get your tuner to turn them just in the direction of the coil, and that will brighten them up a bit. But I think there's a good it's possible if to replace these, and it will improve them, liven them up, and the trebles get livened up too. These are actually copper wound, the bottom three here, so the strings aren't cheap, and the job takes a long time, but it can be done. And these copper ones, these ones are very pleasant. That was slightly different from, that's the one without copper winding, that's the one with, but they match very well on the break point. Now the hammers though, round here, very dull sounding. So we'll look at hammers in a second, because definitely replacing hammers is going to make the main difference to the piano. There's a safety pin in there too, we'll get that out. There's no evidence of moth in any of the felt, which is good news. And you can see the cracks on the soundboard here. I just want to use this opportunity, as I've used before, to say that cracks on the soundboard don't really affect the tone when they're like that. They could do if they're really opened up and you can see light through them. Sometimes that does. But the ribs go in the opposite direction, so the tone's carried by the ribs. We'll look at the crack along there. Now, cosmetically, if you're going to restore the piano and are taking the strings off, you can shim the soundboard at the same time and make it look like a new soundboard. That means you've got to take the decal off here, the badge, and fortunately there are identical badges that you can buy, identical decals, and there's a serial number underneath it. Now, I mentioned the sounds carried by the ribs, so here are the ribs, and they're carrying the sound in the opposite direction to the soundboard. So, those lines on the soundboard are just evidence that it has dried out, or possibly got damp, and then they shrink, and then they push up. Sorry, I beg your pardon. They shrink when they dry out, and then you can see sometimes light through there. This soundboard is perfectly all right. But cosmetically, if you did restring the piano, then you would refinish the top of the soundboard and shim as well. And there's a hydro seal on the bottom here. That's something we've mentioned before. It works if you remember to fill it up all the time. I think it might make a slight difference to humidity, to be fair on it. But the problem is people tend not to use it. In other words, they forget to fill it every month or so, or however often you need to fill it. Often put inside pianos to try and moisturise a bit. It's better than putting a bowl of water in the bottom of the piano, I think, but it's really not making a huge difference. I recommend trying to make sure the room's not too dry. It's the best way around that one. If you've got underfloor heating, then you need an isolation mat, really. So if your tuning pins are a bit loose, you can reset, and on this model of Bluthner, I've found that resetting the pins works very well. You hold that tight so the string doesn't turn, and then you hit it on its head with a hammer like this. So you hold the breast pin setter tight, and you just hit it gently. You're not trying to drive it right in, you're trying to roughen up the wood, and that is remarkably good and works very well on the Bluthner grand pianos. Now we took these screws out to remove the front rail here, the top rail, and you can see the breast plank here. This is the rest plank, the wood that the tuning pins go into. And you can see there's just one layer of wood there, another one there, and one at the bottom. Now if that's replaced, it's replaced with modern delignate rest plank, which is multi-layered, like plenty of layers of wood, about 12, I can't remember how many exactly, but then if they dry out, the wood tends to dry out, different layers dry out differently, but they don't tend to dry out. They're cured to not have that much moisture anyway, so they're put in a lot of new pianos. Otherwise rock maple is used, and some people say rock maple's better. If you're in the piano trade, I'd like to give an opinion on that. Delignate's used a lot in Europe, and it's very successful indeed. Now looking at the action, we can see how much wear there is by looking at the hammers, and there's sort of the middle of the piano, that's roundabout, that note there is actually middle G, and you can see that there's too much area of the hammer hitting the string. When that's more pointed normally, so you would only have perhaps a third of that area hitting the string, and then it's much cleaner sound. And the other thing about the hammers is that they are very soft. I can dig my nail into them, and with new hammers you can't do that. And obviously you can voice them once you put them on if you want it slightly mellower, but it'll be much cleaner sound if they're replaced. So definitely replacing hammers will make a massive difference to the piano. And also these rollers, they've squashed over time, these knuckles or rollers, and consequently the hammer's a bit lower than it should be. So the hammer blow distance is, you can reduce hammer blow distance by just raising the capstans a bit. If you haven't got access to new rollers, then you can just raise the capstans. That's underneath here. You can adjust those. We mentioned that before. You put something in to adjust and turn it, and then that'll raise the hammers up a little bit, which is what you need to do, perhaps about 3 millimeters higher. It'll make a lot of difference to the touch. It's one of the major things it does. The springs aren't working too well either. Actually that one's not so bad, sorry. Let's have a look. that spring is actually not so bad, but they're not all the same as that. That one's not working at all. So if I lift my finger slightly off the key, that one goes up, and this one doesn't go up at all. So the spring should just rise gently, not too gently. Otherwise, they'll if you adjust them. Here's a spring adjuster here. If you adjust the springs too much, then obviously they're going to always double hit. But if you adjust them too gently, then over a short period of time, they won't be working again. So we would get them so they respond very well, but aren't obviously double hitting back on the string again. And the let off was also needing doing. That's this button here and the drop screw. So we mentioned this before, but just briefly to say it again. We've got other videos about that if you're interested in looking at some of them. I try to mention technical points on all the videos. Now some of these dull bass hammers, they seem to be, there's only 2 strings there, and that one seems to have 3 markings on it, so the hammers might have moved around a bit. They're not loose. Often you get loose hinges here, and obviously you can tighten those up. They may have become loose at some stage, been tightened up again, and the hammers ended up a lot softer sounding than it should be. So I think I've written everything down here that we've mentioned. There's a decision to make, really. Replacing hammers, shanks and rollers is a definite one. Possibly restringing with new rest blank, restore soundboard and finished frame. The hammers are going to make the main difference to the piano, let's say 80% in terms of the tone, and then we have to obviously reweight the keys. The key weighting is, as you can see here, is 50 in the middle. That's pretty good, really, but it's a bit varied. 44 here, 47, and then 52. But it's actually not too bad weighting wise. But if we put new hammers on, we have to redo it anyway because new hammers have a different weighting. We do to lubricate the balance rail. I've mentioned that many times before. If you pull the key up and it doesn't go down, then lubricating the balance rail will help the finesse of the piano generally. And regulation is the other thing that's really going to make a huge difference. I didn't actually write regulation down there, but I did say here they all need regulating. There's one damper that's bad. I've just marked it here. We use this to mark things as time goes on, so voicing will be done on there as well. This damper here is not that good, so that's obviously something we can put right, or change all the dampers, which when we restring we usually do, because these dampers are hugging these strings and new dampers will hug the new strings. So I'm just going to play the piano to get some idea of the tone of it before we finish. So that's a Bluthner style 4 grand piano, one of the very best baby grand pianos in the UK, and there's a reasonable number of them, though we could do with more. There's also demand for them, and this is a very good example. They're nearly always consistently good tone underneath, but you can hear the underlying tone is all there, just beautifully smooth and mellow. And of course with new hammers it'll be more distinct. When they're all done, you'll see a lot of difference. Round here, they're particularly soft and are not bringing out the tone that we'd like them to bring out. New strings here as well would help. I would mention if you haven't got access to new strings, you can try turning the bass strings, and it often makes a difference. So turning in the direction of the coil, just one turn. So there is the option to just change hammers, shanks and rollers, reset some of the pins if they're a bit loose, and it'll probably be fine. Or while we're doing it, the option to restring and then do the soundboard, make it look perfect, and that's what we very often do. And obviously the frame and the rest plank while you're at it, and then it'll be like a new piano. So I hope that's been helpful. If you've got a Bluthner grand piano, either the older style, this is the 20s, late 20s, 30s style, that is the small one. The older style is bigger. Very different, the older style has a different action called a patent action. This has a normal roller action like other pianos. You hear there, definitely needs improving. beautiful clear sound. Even now I'm really enjoying playing it. The action regulation isn't good, so you don't feel you've got the control that you would have. Definitely you can feel a lack of control. When it's fully regulated, it will have a lot more control. I hope that's helpful. Thank you very much for listening. If you are interested in having a piano restored, please do write to us, info@robertspianos.com. Or if you want to buy a piano, we try and get these small Bluthners. We have got more longer ones generally, which obviously produce a bigger sound being a longer piano.